The Sugar Bowl this season is a tale of two different teams with two different stories and totally different levels of expectation and on-field talent and resources. And you know what the best part of it is? There are no opt-outs. This isn't a playoff game. None of these teams have a shot to win the national title. None of them have a shot to finish higher than, I would say, third in the AP poll, in coaches poll, in Alabama's case. And for Kansas State, they don't have a shot of finishing in the top 4 or 5 because they have 3 losses. These teams are fighting for pride. They're fighting for a New Year's Six Bowl victory, which many consider completely worthless, but true college football fans, like myself, like many others, and true college football players and coaching staffs, great coaches, Nick Saban, Chris Kleiman, all of these that I've mentioned understand the importance of winning a New Year's Six Bowl game. It's one extra win, so why not go out and win it, utilize the practices, utilize the experience gained, and fight for pride and for a trophy that you can put in your trophy room. This is, for Alabama, a disappointment. It's kind of a consolation prize in a sense. For Kansas State, a win here would be a big step forward. Now, I'm talking about this in perspective to the fan bases and to national expectations. Alabama was expected to win it all this year or be the runner-up. Kansas State was expected to be a dark horse Big 12 contender, maybe get 8, 9 wins, maybe 10th if they won their bowl game. But no one picked Kansas State to win the Big 12. And no one picked them to be a team that many say in retrospect shouldn't have lost more than 1 or 2 games. The game against Tulane in retrospect was a bit fluky, even though Tulane is good, but Kansas State really was slow in that game, very uncharacteristic. The game against TCU, a freak injury to both quarterback Adrian Martinez and Will Howard occurred, which enabled the TCU comeback, and the Texas game was a loss by 7 points. For Alabama, this team reminds me of a combination of 2014 Florida State and 2016 Michigan. They're 2014 Florida State in the sense that they've beaten nobody and they've won a bunch of close games. They're 2016 Michigan in the fact that their 2 losses are by a combined 4 points, and one of those losses was in overtime. And statistically, they are extremely impressive on the surface, having the 4th best scoring offense with 40.8 points per game, and having the 9th best scoring defense, allowing only 18 points per game. And they have freaks on defense, freaky talent on defense like 2016 Michigan, but also like that Wolverines team, a questionable defensive coordinator in Pete Golding. So this game fascinates me a lot. You know, these two teams are very much opposites when it comes to expectations, on-field talent, the strength and schematics of both of these teams. Kansas State's more of an old school, good at trench play. I think they have an All-American on the offensive line and defensive line. I know that for a fact. Compared to Alabama, who's evolved into this spread kind of air raid style of team that's really fast and really modern. I'm excited for this game. For Alabama, it's interesting to note that this is the first time since 2019 they've lost 2 regular season games. It's the first time they've been to a New Year's Six Bowl that isn't a playoff game since 2013. The Citrus Bowl isn't considered a New Year's Six Bowl, and they went to that in 2019. And like in 2010, this year's Alabama team returned their Heisman winner and several other players and much other production, and yet they lost multiple regular season games and didn't even compete for a national title like they were expected to. So here we go, and let's talk about the All-State Sugar Bowl. After giving some of that background context and some fun facts, let's actually preview these two teams. This game is going to take place at noon on New Year's Eve. It will be kind of the warm-up game to the playoffs, which makes sense in a certain way because Alabama was the first team out, and many thought that they were going to take that fourth or potentially third spot when both TCU and USC lost on championship week. Alabama is given a 72.7% chance to win according to ESPN's Football Power Index, which makes sense because at all of these positions, except for staff, because staff, their talent and their expertise aren't measured by stars next to their name coming out of high school, but Alabama by far has a talent advantage at every position. They have more 5 stars than Kansas State has 4 stars. Go look it up on 24/7 Sports Talent Composite Index. Kansas State only has 3 high school 4 stars. Alabama has more than 10, as we all know, high school 5 stars. The talent disparity between these two teams is crazy. But what matters is not just recruiting talent, but developing it. This year's Alabama team has been porous at developing and utilizing the talent they've been gifted. The coordinators, at least, have been gifted. And you can just look and shake your head at Bill O'Brien and Pete Golding and Charles Kelly, who was the former co-defensive coordinator at Alabama, but now is the defensive coordinator at Colorado, for breaking this team down from a national title contender to a New Year's Six Bowl contender. I'm still going to give the edge for Alabama at quarterback. Will Howard's good. I think he could be a Heisman candidate next year with how he's played this year. But Bryce Young, let me tell you something. I thought C.J. Stroud was the best quarterback in the nation entering this year, and I maintained that thought throughout the season. The way Bryce Young carries this team, Bryce Young, if Jalen Milroe played for the whole year, Alabama would probably be an 8-4, 9-3 win team, and I'd lean more toward 8-4. Bryce Young is what has kept this team. He is what kept this team in the game versus Tennessee. He is what kept this team from losing to Texas. And he's a phenomenal player, and we're going to talk about him more statistically when I break down the impact players of the game. Both these teams have good quarterbacks. Jalen Milroe is a good backup. Adrian Martinez, who I don't think will be playing in this game due to injury, but I could be wrong. He was playing very high-level football before being injured, and Will Howard replaced him. But I'm going to give the edge to Alabama, both from the eye test, on-field performance, just from everything. Quarterback goes to Alabama. Running back is extremely close, but I will say that Chase McClellan and Jahmyr Gibbs, one of the best running back duos in the nation. Deuce Vaughn, as an individual back, might be the best out of those 3, though Jahmyr Gibbs certainly would compete for number 1 as well. But Alabama rules here with overall depth. They have so many talented running backs. All of them look fantastic and play great football. For wide receiver, this one is going to be interesting, but I have some reasons for it. One would be that, JoJo Earl and other wide receivers have entered the portal. So Alabama's depth is hurt at wide receiver. Also, B would be that Alabama's wide receivers, whether it's Jermaine Burton, Ja'Cory Brooks, Kobe Prentice, they have not. This has been one of Alabama's worst wide receiver rooms in a while. I think any Alabama fan would tell you that. Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, Henry Ruggs. There are other names that I'm forgetting. Jerry Jeudy, how could I forget him? From 2018. 19, 20, even 21 with Jamison Williams and John Mechie. For years, Alabama's been spoiled with good wide receivers. They've recruited well, developed well at that position. This year, nada. They don't have even close to a 1,000-yard receiver. Their leading receiver has 623 receiving yards. For Kansas State, they also don't have like a 1,000-yard receiver, but they have Malik Knowles, they have Cade Warner, who's Kurt Warner's son, very underrated, and they have Phillip Brooks. And I think with some of the outgoing transfers for Alabama's already poor wide receiver depth, and Malik Knowles, Phillip Brooks, and Cade Warner being a solid group of wide receivers, I'm just going to slightly lean Kansas State here. But if you wanted to pick Alabama at wide receiver, go right ahead. There's all the evidence in the world to support that as well. Tight end, I trust Cameron Latu and Alabama's tight ends right there. And then for trench play, you have Cooper Beebe. You have a guy whose name I forget on the defensive line who's played All-American. Alabama's defensive line, in theory, is really talented. Their linebacker room, though, seems to be the main strength of their defense with Will Anderson, who's the nation's best defensive player. Kansas State's very solid overall at trench play. They have the 10th most efficient defense. Their offense is close to top 25 in efficiency. Their O-line especially is supreme. Defensive back, Alabama's defensive backs have been morbid in coverage. And then I would say just look at Kansas State playing TCU both times and taking a look at Alabama and how they fared against Texas when Quinn Ewers was healthy and how they fared against Tennessee. Defensive backs, I'm going to go for Kansas State. Special teams, Alabama has the more efficient special teams unit by statistics. And for staff, Kansas State, with the amount of talent they've been given and what they've produced, and the fact that by win-loss record and by overall play they're close to Alabama, Kansas State staff is so much better utilized. The talent gifted to them, they're schematically better, they're more disciplined than Alabama is. This Kansas State staff, yes, of course Nick Saban's the better head coach compared to Chris Kleiman, but outside of the head coaches, give me the Kansas State staff all day. Nonetheless, the Tide are favored by 6.5 points, which makes sense. They have a lot more NFL players, overall talent. They're power rated higher too, even in efficiency. They're number 2 in the FPI, they're 3rd in efficiency. Kansas State's number 11 in football power index and 10th in efficiency. Now you see the talent disparity here as I've displayed. Alabama is the nation's most talented team in high school recruiting and in transfer portal recruiting, in theory. They are the most talented team by raw talent, judged by recruiting experts from ESPN, 24/7 Sports, all of these, Rivals.com, all these different websites. On 3, Alabama is the nation's most talented team. Only Georgia and Ohio State come close. After those 3, talent falls off a cliff. Completely off a cliff. Kansas State is in the bottom half of Power 5 teams in total team talent. The bottom half. Massive talent disparity. Big time talent disparity right there. In fact, Adrian Martinez he might be the most talented player looking at high school ratings on the 24/7 Sports Team Talent Index. He might be Kansas State's most talented player on their depth chart according to that index. And he's not even playing. So there's a big talent disparity here. It's going to be especially tough for Kansas State to overcome. Now, can they do it? Looking at how they've competed with teams with far superior talent. I mean, even TCU is a lot more talent than Kansas State has. They've competed with Texas. They beat Oklahoma on the road before Oklahoma was broken. You could actually argue that Kansas State broke that OU team. If not, then TCU certainly did. I mean, TCU was up, like 55-17 at some point in that game. But Kansas State, they're well coached. They coach up their talent. Alabama this year, in comparison, is somewhat coached down their talent. But this doesn't make the Crimson Tide any less terrifying if you're Kansas State. You know, if you're Georgia, if you're Michigan, like teams that are solid in the trenches, but you have a lot more talent than Kansas State, you have more athleticism, you have more speed, then you don't have to worry about Alabama. I think most playoff teams would handily beat this Alabama team, potentially by 10 points or more. I happen to think that Alabama is overrated at the 5 spot. I think they fit more around that 8, 9, 10 spot, if I'm being honest. And I think Kansas State is actually underrated. I think they could be a few places higher than 9, but seeing that they have 3 losses and they have a habit of playing that old school defensive style football that can be very unsustainable in the modern era, having them at 9 also makes perfect sense. The Crimson Tide's main strength is Bryce Young, the guy who carries the team on his back, the wizard, the point guard. He, if we're going by the best player in the nation, or if we're taking into account like a player that carries their team, that wills their team to win, Bryce Young should have went to New York. He wasn't nearly as statistically impressive this year as last year. Half of that, though, was that his wide receiver core just collapsed off the charts. The run game, it did get better, yes, but also the defense did get worse. I mean, this team compared to last year was just worse overall. And then Bill O'Brien as a play caller, he somehow regressed. I don't necessarily understand how you do that. I know part of it was the fact that, again, Bama's wide receivers, Tyler Harrell and Jermaine Burton, were expected to be big-time additions. At least I expected them to be. Tyler Harrell is, at least just judging by this year, a complete bust, and Jermaine Burton isn't just not good. Kansas State's main strength is their physical trench play. Their offensive line and defensive line have quite the presence. That, I would say, that we all know for a fact. Very much so. They're so physical. They know how to open up gaps. They know how to pressure the quarterback. Anudike Ozoma. Felix Anudike Ozoma. That's the guy whose name I was looking for. The All-American defensive end. Brendan Mott. Eli Huggins. That right there is Kansas State's defensive line. Their offensive line is KT Leviston, Cooper Beebe, Hayden Gilliam, Hadley Panzer, and Christian Duffy. Those eight players are the main strength of the Kansas State Wildcats, that physical trench play. And Deuce Vaughn, who plays behind that physical and elite offensive line, is Kansas State's player to watch. And for Alabama, it's Bryce Young. And I just want to start off with the Heisman winner from last season. Bryce Young was 29th in passing yards, 15th in passing touchdowns, 20th in passing interceptions, and 8th in overall QBR. This year, Bryce Young had a 156.5 passer rating. He threw for 20 less touchdowns than he did last year. He averaged a half yard less per pass attempt than last year. He completed 3% less of his passes than last year. He overall regressed. He got sacked less times, yes, but Alabama's offensive line, period, amen, just still has been subpar. And part of that is the fact that, Alabama last year faced an overall tougher schedule, in my opinion, than this year's Bama team did. Last year, Bama played Georgia twice. They played a tough Cincinnati defense in the college football playoff. They played a Texas A&M team that was all defense. They played a better Ole Miss team. They played and played and played. They played an Auburn team that was just fantastic on defense. The SEC this year, the West for sure. The East is stronger, but the SEC West this year, much, much weaker. Much weaker than it was last year. To partially compensate for his regression in the passing game, Young this year has 195 rushing yards, averages 4.2 yards per carry, and has 4 rushing touchdowns. And he rushed half the times as he did last year. But so he's not been used as much as he has been last year, but he's still an impact player. He leads and carries his team to victory, or he's the reason why they were in a game that they lost. He's the reason that they were in that Tennessee game and in the LSU game when LSU's defense and offense was, dominating the Crimson Tide. For Kansas State, it's running back Deuce Vaughn. Deuce Vaughn has rushed for 1,425 yards, 8 touchdowns, 5.3 yards per carry. He's also statistically regressed from last year. He's had 36 more carries, only 21 more yards, averages nearly a whole yard less per carry, and has 10 less rushing touchdowns. He also has 1 less receiving touchdown. So he's been used more, but partially because the running threat of Adrian Martinez and the fact that Kansas State's passing game has just taken a step forward. Like I think it's Skylar Thompson was their quarterback last year, and he came off an injury in 2020 that severely limited his mobility. But Kansas State, they didn't have that problem this year because Will Howard, despite being, pretty big pro-style guy, has some mobility, and Adrian Martinez, as we all know, is that he's the pure dual-threat QB that Kansas State wanted and found and played for the first half of this season, played him very successfully. Deuce Vaughn is 5'6", 176 pounds. He's the definition of a bowling ball with a low center of gravity. Open space, you can't catch him. He's gone. He will sit you down on the grass if you let him cut across you. So, great running back, great quarterback. Again, none of these teams have opt-outs. And Alabama has a great running back in Jahmyr Gibbs. Kansas State has what I think is going to be a very good QB in this game, but also a great QB next year in Will Howard. Finally, I want to talk about my prediction. Alabama has not beaten a 9 or greater win football team. Their losses are to 9-win LSU and 10-win Tennessee. Those are their losses. Their most impressive wins were Texas and Mississippi State. Texas and Mississippi State both being 8-4. Texas was on the road. Mississippi State was at home. Alabama, they're statistically impressive, but they played Vanderbilt, Utah State, Austin Peay, Auburn, a lot of teams where they got to stat pad and look more impressive than they actually were. And this isn't to say that Alabama isn't a good team. Alabama's, a touchdown or 2 or 3, like they're 20 odd points away from being an 8-4 team or from being 12-0. But the overall point is all of their games are close, except for the games that, against Vanderbilt, Austin Peay, a trash Auburn team, the games that shouldn't be close. They're not impressive when you watch them. The statistics that rank them in the top 5 in efficiency and power rankings are bogus. Kansas State, there is an argument that if you include the fact that Tennessee is opt-outs, or if you say to yourself that Tennessee's defense is just not good, there could be an argument that Kansas State might be the best team Alabama's faced all year. They're at least the second best team that Alabama's faced all year. Kansas State would beat LSU. I think that's close to a fact. Bryce Young will have a 1-to-1 TDINT ratio. He'll play, if you really look at him and how he carries this team, he'll play them well. He'll play himself well. But at the end of the day, Kansas State's defense and offense, I think, will be too solid. And the Alabama defense will allow 2 big plays. I think 1 through the air, 1 on the ground, potentially more. And just with Deuce Vaughn's explosiveness, he could break off some big runs. Because you can run on this Alabama defense. Kansas State will pick up a massive win. They'll move to 11-3. They'll finish in the top 8. Will Howard will throw for around 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. And running back Deuce Vaughn will have a run of 20 yards or more. The over-under for this game is 56. This is totaling at 51. I do think this game will be more defensive, as Kansas State they're statistically a defensive team. Alabama's offense and defense are known both to sputter, but their defense outside of explosive offenses like Tennessee is still overall very solid. Like against offenses that aren't elite, Alabama's defense can do the job and can hold you to under 30 or under 35 points. But their offense, that would be the biggest concern. The wide receivers against a solid defense and secondary that Kansas State has, the run game against a D-line that includes an All-American. And listen, Alabama's defense will contain Kansas State, but they're not going to do what they did to Mississippi State and hold Kansas State to like a singular touchdown. Kansas State's offense is too good for that, and Alabama's defense, especially at secondary, matching up against an underrated group of wide receivers, is not good enough to shut down a great Kansas State team like this. So 27-24, this game, Alabama's heavily favored, but I think this game will be closer than a lot of people think. But I'm excited to watch it because it's going to be a tune-up to the playoffs, and congratulations to both the staffs for convincing their players to not opt out and finish out the season strong and show that they are leaders, that they're not going to quit or they're not going to opt out when adversity comes. And that isn't a shot at players who opt out. Like for Jackson Smith-Njigba, for example, he's been injured all year. It makes sense that he doesn't further risk his health, but for healthy players, for players that don't have a great risk, like for injury, you're still taking a risk by playing in that bowl game, but you do have the potential to reap some greater rewards as well. Just some of my thoughts, just an opinion. And with that, I'll close out this video. Thank you guys for watching. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all later. Bye-bye.